Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us once again, and welcome to those joining for the first time. My name is Sarah Longcar, and I'm ACSI's Learning and Development Manager. Every week, we're providing this legal legislative brief with our team here at ACSI. We will begin by providing you with a report on the latest changes that have come through since our time together last Monday. Then we'll spend the final portion of our time together in Q&A, with questions we've received from school leaders and perhaps a few that are being submitted now in the Q&A panel. Before we get started today, we'd love to know more about those that are on our call. So we would ask that you would fill out the poll appearing on your screen at this time. Thank you for starting to answer those questions. And now I would like to hand it over to Philip.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you to all those who have joined us in our phone call today, or webinar today, rather. I'd like to start off just sharing a few of the various things that have come up over this past week, and then answer some of the questions that we still had outstanding from last week, particularly the ones that we've seen multiple times. And then from there, hand it over to Tom and George. Next. So just a reminder to everyone, this is an educational webinar. We're not providing legal services. ACSI is not a law firm. So keep that in mind. You need to seek the counsel that's appropriate for your situation. Also want to remind everyone that we see the screenshot here of the coronavirus resource page, particularly the legal legislative section. These webinars are being recorded and those are posted there. You can go back and watch those. The last couple have been very specific on the PPP loans, as well as the CARES Act in general, the educational aspects. We also have materials on the emergency FMLA and other written materials, all available on the website there. So make sure you are visiting the acsi.org coronavirus section of the website. Next. So the quick update on my end, the IRS has pretty much created extensions for every type of reporting almost that needs to be filed between April 1st and July 15th. The two that I think are relevant, want to bring up is the Form 990. So most of our schools, if you're not a church ministry, that's going to apply to you. And then for a number of the schools, the Form 5500, which essentially is for retirement plans, ERISA type of plans that you might have in place, particularly if you are helping to fund some of your employers or your employees rather retirement programs. Next. So I wanted to spend the majority of my time just on a couple of questions. We got a lot of questions about Title IX exemption and how that applies specifically in the CARES Act loan programs. And so as you're going through the application, at the very end, it talks about the non-discrimination civil rights clauses that apply to the loan application, particularly the PPP, the payroll protection program loans. And one of those has to deal with Title IX. And so Title IX does apply to those who are educational institutions, so that's everyone on the call, that for the life of that loan. So anywhere from, let's say, nine weeks to 2 years, however the loan forgiveness and the loan repayment aspects last. So Title IX, though, does have there is a specific exemption. We talked a little bit about that last week, but before the exemption, Title IX, for the most part, there's a lot there, but essentially it's going to talk about equal treatment. And the big one is on the basis of sex, right? So it often comes up in athletics, but also comes up in admissions and in hiring, those type of things. And for the most part, I don't think most of our schools are going to have issues with admissions or hiring, but it does come up two big issues. One is, how is sex defined? Has that been redefined to mean gender identity or transgender, some of those type of aspects. And there's some confusion there, under the Obama administration, it was redefined as that or interpreted as that. However, the Trump administration has rolled that back, and they have put out from the Department of Ed their understanding that sex in Title IX refers to male, female. And so there's some assurance there. Now, I will say in the future, the Supreme Court can modify that, or if the election coming up, the administration turns over into a new administration, that's not a Trump administration, that definition could change again. But for now, sex means male, female. There's also an exemption for Title IX, and I've got the language there in that first bullet. Doesn't apply to educational institutions controlled by a religious organization, if you're a religious entity, to the extent that it would be inconsistent with your tenets. And so there is a process where you can file a form with the U.S. Department of Ed to essentially put them on notice that you are claiming the exemption. However, I will say, and I've got the link there, and we will post this presentation, but the link there provides you the Department of Ed's understanding of this exemption. And they would say, and a lot of religious liberty advocates would say, you don't have to file the paperwork to say we're claiming an exemption. It's not something you have to file. You can claim it in the time of need, if you will, if it becomes an issue. So you have an option. You can file it if you want or not, and we can talk more about the pros and cons of each. But all that to say, there is a religious exemption if issues of Title IX would force you to be inconsistent with the religious tenets of your school, and there is a way to claim that exemption. Another question, seat hours. If our state, a couple questions dealt with, if our state waives, the hour requirements, seat requirements, 6 hours a day type of thing, or days of instruction, let's say it's 180 school days, there has to be 180 days of school instruction or 185 days of instruction, what have you. Should our private schools follow suit? And I think the first question you need to ask is to make sure that this waiver does apply to the private schools. And what I mean by that is, if you are in a particular type of program or some funding is tied to that, you want to make sure that the waiver ties back to the specific rules of the program you're in. If we're just talking about general statewide truancy laws, you're probably okay there, following what the state does for the private schools as far as those waivers. I think that's the legal standpoint. From the standpoint, though, of what you do in the school, you really want to make sure that let's take advantage of this, right? Let's not go to the lowest common denominator, but if this is the case, then let's do education in the way that we would prefer to do it, or we would want to do it, without these constraints being there. Next. Another question we saw several times is, can I sign the certification on the payroll protection program loans? And what they're referring to is there is a requirement. One of the sign-offs uses this language there. It says current economic uncertainties make this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant, right? And so I think often the context has been, our school has some reserve funds, or we're doing okay at the moment. Can we, in good faith, sign this and take the loan? I think that's a question you have to be able to answer yourself. But I would say, from where I sit, I think just about anyone could sign this in good faith. And what I mean by that is, it's not just simply what's happening now, because we don't know how long the current situation is going to last, right? If this lasts till August, which they're talking about, at least in some places, particularly with increased death rates and the rest, we don't know what will happen next week. A little less through the coming weeks and months. And so I think that is a question you're going to have to answer as a school on a case-by-case basis, but I don't see an ethical issue there in being able to say yes, because it's the unknown. We just don't know. Further, it's not just simply, do we have the reserve funds, but I think it goes into the question of what about parents and their jobs, right? That's something you don't really have control over. if this continues and more parents continue to lose their jobs or the financial strains put upon them, how is that going to impact your enrollment in your schools? So that's how I would approach that question as well. And with that, these are the most frequent ones that we received, and so we wanted to address those up front. Now I'm going to pass it over to Tom and George for some more updates before we circle back to further questions that you guys have submitted today.
Thank you, Philip. I want to just again remind schools because I still continue to get questions about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. Well, the question is, our school is still doing, our teachers are doing online instruction, but we've closed our school based on government orders by the governor, stay-at-home orders, and so we have other people who are unable to work, their support staff, their maybe some of the special type classes, and they're unable to work. Do they qualify? And the answer to that is no. Okay, if the school's closed and there are employees that there's not work available for them to do, then they are ineligible for this program. And again, we've talked about that. The whole idea is to provide work for those that can work, but they're unable, then to give them some kind of financial benefit. And they're unable based on the qualifying reasons under both of those, and having no work and the school closed is not one of those reasons that would work. So just a reminder, because I still continue to get a lot of questions about that. Okay, another one is I brought this up last week, and we're just going to mention it this week when it comes to unemployment. And again, excuse me, I'm sorry, the slide jumped forward there. I wanted to remind you that unemployment, normally a church school would not be paying unemployment taxes. Their employees are exempt, and therefore they do not qualify for unemployment. However, under the First Coronavirus Act, they do now qualify for unemployment. Those that are in church schools, you'll see right here some of the wording, and I'm not going to read it all to you, but if you just see at the very last point there, these individuals may also include certain gig economic workers, clergy, and those working for religious organizations who are not covered by regular unemployment. So here again, it's now going to cover those employees. The next area is that of, well, let's say you're an independent school, but maybe you do have to pay, but you're signed up for that reimbursement method. And some new guidance that I received this week points out that they are covered, those employees would be covered. However, the federal government is only reimbursing back to the state 50% of that. So it's really giving you then as a school a 50% off of what you normally have to pay if somebody did file for unemployment in that reimbursement method. So please note that if they are filing for unemployment, you're an independent school, then the federal government's going to pay 50% to the state. The state's going to bill you for the other half, which normally you'd get the full bill, but now you're only getting 50% of that. Here's some other things that I haven't talked about in the past that regards to the CARES Act and health insurance. So most of you will have group health insurance for your employees, and these are some things that that under the CARES Act it now covers without any copay, any kind of diagnostic testing for COVID-19. So please note that if you have an employee that goes out and gets that testing, that your insurance company, they cannot be charged a copay for that. The same goes with the vaccine. So if there's some kind of vaccine or things that they're giving that person because of the virus, those are also covered with no copay. Even if you've got a high deductible and they have to pay so much out of pocket first, the diagnostic testing and the vaccines are totally free to your employees under the CARES Act program. And that's the way the insurance needs to set it up. Also, your HSA, there's coverage there for telehealth services. In other words, high deductible health plans again, with health savings accounts, may cover telehealth or teledoc or whatever else it might be called, services without requiring that the minimum deductibles are applicable. Again, it will be, at this point during this crisis, teledoc, telehealth is free to employees. They don't have to meet their deductible. They don't have to pay out of pocket for those. And then the third point here is that if you have an HSA, which typically you would have with a high deductible account, or with regular insurance, you might have an FSA, a flexible spending account that your employees can put money into tax-free. And under the Affordable Care Act, any kind of over-the-counter drug was taken away that you could use your HSA or FSA for. Well, that now has been put back in without an ending date, and basically now you can purchase, your employees can purchase over-the-counter drugs without a prescription. And in fact, it says, most items, about thousands of items, including pain relievers, cold, flu medications, antacids, so forth, allergy, are now reimbursable through your HSA or FSA. Now, it still excludes vitamins and supplements, things like that. You'd have to have a prescription to get those covered by the HSA. And the interesting is there's no expiration. So this has put it back in for the time being permanently that your employees can now use their HSA or their FSA to pay for these over-the-counter drugs. There's been a lot of talk over the weekend when the Federal Reserve Board released a new program called the Main Street Lending Program, which is about a $600 billion program of loans that's going to come through the Federal Reserve Program. And a lot of it's for businesses that are, the purpose of it was for to have bigger businesses that have up to 10,000 employees to be able to get some loans. They're not forgiven. They have to repay them. And it's real clear that in those loans, until different clarification comes out, those loans are not available to nonprofits. I've already had some ask about those, and they've already stated that those are not available to our schools in that Main Street Lending Program. So with that, I want to turn it over to over to George. Over to George Trifiati's our director in Washington, D.C. George, take it away.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. Greetings, everyone, from stormy Washington, D.C., where I represent you as Director for Government Affairs, and where I'm looking forward to having Philip Scott join me out here and boosting our boots on the ground, and which you may have received a notice about. So we're excited about that. I'm going to churn through the first few of these slides because I want to lay the groundwork for what I'd like to be able to say, and just to offer you some reminders to start with. CARES Act has created an education stabilization fund divided into 3 separate funds. In 18002, it's the governor's. In 18003, it's a fund for elementary and secondary schools. 18004 is higher ed, so we won't be discussing that. Later, I may bring up 18001. The 2 funds that apply to, go ahead. The 2 funds that apply to K-12 schools are the Schools Fund and the Governor's Fund. They both require local education agencies, the LEA, to make equitable services available to non-public schools. So just as a reminder, you would get equitable services for both of those funds. So there's no federal financial assistance issue in that regard. The LEA is required to consult with non-public schools. Control of funds is maintained by the LEA, and the funds are available through next September 30 of 2021. Next, please. So the 18002 is the Governor's Fund. 18003 is elementary and secondary. The Governor's Emergency Relief Fund includes early childhood education, so I like to point that out. In 18003, again, the allocation of funds to the states based on the same proportion each state received under Title I in the most recent fiscal year, and the law authorizes 12 uses of funds. Just invite you to review the slides from the last presentation for those 12 uses. It requires, and so I would just recommend that you reach out to your LEA now about participating in either emergency relief fund. Equitable services for both flow through your LEA. They require consultation with non-public schools. We've advised the Department of Ed that there may be far more interest in the emergency program than under the standard title services. So the idea is that the USDE would hopefully alert LEAs to that reality. We'll see if they do that. So we talked about things to think about next time. I'm just going to highlight a couple of issues. One, your previous non-participation in title services should not be relevant. So if you don't know the key personnel in your LEA, please reach out, but don't let them tell you you can't participate in this. You should be able to participate in it because this is a new program of emergency funds. And second, make sure the LEA counts all of your children in their grant application. All children are eligible to participate in the emergency program, not just Title I children. So both of these items actually are in some kind of dispute, and we're looking for the Department of Education to provide for us some guidance. And I see my screen is frozen, so I'm going to jump on and off and see if that works. Okay, so we're looking for guidance from the Department of Education. This screen, I just want to point out to you that if you have participated in the title services earlier, that's use number 1 of the 12. Those funds may have been moved around. Again, just to remind you, if the state gets money back into a fund that it took money out of, and you were waiting for those funds, for those services through that particular title, please double check with your LEA. So let's go on to the next one. All right, so today, the Department of Education put up a new website on the Education Stabilization Fund. And so I wanted to alert you to that. You've got the link right there. They've got an ongoing coronavirus web page as well. So we'll just re-link that for you. But that ESF, sorry, there's a typo there. The Education Stabilization Fund webpage, I'm expecting that's where we'll see the guidance once the Department of Ed does actually provide for that. So let's move to the next one. The new thing that we have on our website is a memo to school leaders on CARES Act and the Education Stabilization Fund. And we've provided a sample letter for your LEA that you could use, you can adapt in terms of communicating with your LEA. I'd like to just review a couple key points from that memo to school leaders. So if we can skip to the, or move on. So number 1, what you need to know about non-public school participation. And again, this is a little bit repetitive. The law requires equitable services to be provided under the LEA, under both the governor's and the schools fund. It requires the LEA to consult with you in order to meet your needs through equitable services. And the program is open to all non-public schools, even if they have not participated in federal education programs in the past. So I just drive that point home for you, please. Next slide. What can you do to be prepared? We have 3 items. 1, begin drafting a needs assessment for your school, your students, and your teachers. Like I said, the legislation has 12 categories of permissible uses. The SEA and the LEA should not begin making plans for dispersing those funds until the Department of Ed releases guidance on how to implement the new law, and that's still expected at any time. And so a needs assessment of your own needs, it's not necessarily required. It's just getting your needs on paper in order to share. That's your goal. And as much as possible, tie any requests to specific student needs. So let's move to the next screen for number 2. Proactively reach out to your LEA, let them know you look forward to consulting on the Education Stabilization Fund. They're required to consult with you. If you're a school that hasn't participated in ESSA, which is the new name for the ESEA, or with the IDEA in the past, it's even more important for you to reach out proactively, introduce yourself, tell them about your school. 3rd slide, please. So it might be helpful for you to have the actual text of sections 18.002, 3, and 5 with you to the consultation, and the guidance itself once it's released. The text for those are in the memo at the link on the above slide, and it's going to be, and that's available, of course, on our legal legislative coronavirus webpage. So that to your attention. Next, on April 6th, the Department of Ed issued a press release that talked about funding flexibility, and that could impact how you deal with your LEA. And so these are the bullet items that were in the press release where flexibility and waivers have been provided by the Department of Ed to the SEAs, the state education agencies, and the LEAs. So if you had funds already in the process under any of these particular titles, you might want to just double check, make sure that those funds are still available or are now going to be available if they hadn't been prior to that. So I did want to mention to you that there is one other fund that will go to the governors, and it is not necessarily through equitable services. 18001, which was not mentioned earlier, allows for 1% of the total to go to governors in the hardest hit states. And so if you're in one of those states, the governor will have some discretionary funds available. However, that is not required to be done through equitable services. So again, both for that and for your other governor's fund opportunities, please be reaching out to your LEAs, but also to your coalition partners. Work in conjunction where you can with ACSI state coalitions where they exist, again, with CAPE, where states have state chapters there, with your local Catholic conference and Jewish and independent schools. Everyone should be working together to make a pitch to the governor for things that you may need. And also in schools that in states that have school choice programs, and friendly governors in particular, it would be important to make sure that those are properly funded. So bottom line, we're waiting on guidance from the Department of Ed on how to implement all of these things. And so we will let you know as soon as that's available. And Tom, if you go to the last slide, I'll just, or my last slide, remind you Christ is risen. There's hope. Christos Anesti, a little Greek lingo for you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, George. He is risen indeed. Well, we now want to spend this final portion answering questions that you have submitted to us, and we encourage you to continue submitting those questions using the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. But we want to jump right in here with our first question, and that question is, should we offer and sign full teacher contracts for this next school year, not knowing enrollment?
Yeah, I'll answer that one. There is already a document on the coronavirus resource page that talks about new language for force majeure clauses that we suggest you take a look at, which tangentially addresses that. Really, the bigger issue though is and we've suggested this for years, that you should have language in your contract that allows you to in the contract based on the financial needs of the school, and so tie it specifically to, you know, either class sizes based on enrollment or the financial budgeting of the school. That yes, you have a contract, but essentially you leave an out for the school if these things happen. So budget is less than was planned for. Enrollment was less than was planned for, or even the third grade, we planned to have 2 third grade teachers. We had 30 kids. And for whatever reason, now we only have 23 kids. And so we only need 1 third grade teacher now. So we do have sample language for that. That is not posted on the coronavirus website as of today, but it will be posted there. We will get that up for you, but we would suggest you have some language along those lines. Along with that, Tom, I think this is a question for you. It deals with employment as well. And I'll just read the question here. It says, if a school employee files for unemployment and we pay 50% of the bill, will that raise our rates over the next 5 years? And then how does, the second question, but related, with the CARES Act, it bumps up the unemployment for an additional $600. How does that come into play? Is the school going to have to reimburse that or cover those costs? Can you address some of that?
Sure. Thanks, Philip. Good question. Number one, again, the state normally would be, you'd be paying, if your reimbursement method, you'd be paying 100% of unemployment. So however that would affect your unemployment reimbursement, there is no rates. You're only paying exactly what the employee is entitled to. So again, there would be no increase in rates as far as that goes. Then the extra $600, it's unclear if that is for our employees typically what the law says right now is that those that are typically get unemployment, they're going to get it increased their whatever amount that is by 600. It's unclear whether they'll take the rate for our nonprofit employees and still raise that another 600. If they do, and that's reimbursable, then that's a possibility that that could be reimbursable. But I would believe that that's going to be a federal government piece that they are paying.
Tom, how does, again, another employment question, how does the head count, the FTE, the full-time equivalent, how does that work when we're talking about teachers and staff who may only have, let's say, a 10-month contract, and they're only working for part of the year under that contract? How is that going to be counted when it comes to the PPP loans and the forgiveness portions?
Good question. So to start with, to get the loan, you have to provide the average monthly salary for the previous year, and that was to get how much, to pay times 2.5 times that. However, the forgiveness part is connected, as what we understand, is going to be connected to your payroll. That's going to compare February 15th to June 30th of 2020 to February 15th till June 30th of 2019. Therefore, those substitutes, those teachers that their contracts are finished, others that might be done for the summer, it's going to compare to the previous year. So those should look the same as long as you've rehired everybody and not left people off the payroll during this coronavirus time.
Thanks, Tom. We're going to hand it right back to you, though, with this question here. It says, in order to get a PPP loan forgiven, will you need to show how your income has been negatively affected during the period of the coronavirus shutdown?
Exactly. That's what I just mentioned, is that you are going to have to show that you have kept the same number of employees and FTEs that you had that previous year. So again, that's why it's really important that maybe you've laid off a bunch of people, that if you do get the loan, you rehire them and redeploy them. If there's not work for them to do, such as a cafeteria worker or a bus driver or others, figure out ways to give them something to do and reemploy them, so that they're maybe helping teachers online and doing some online tutoring, calling families. As we mentioned before, just you want to put them back on the payroll, because if you don't, that will count against how much you will be able to get forgiven.
George, we've got a question about the equitable services aspects. One of the difficulties schools are having is trying to come up with the idea of a list of items that's going to be needed by the time those dollars start coming to the school. And do we have any advice on that, or is there a list of what those things could be? How is that getting addressed? And I'll leave it there.
Right. So I think my reaction to that is, number one, the school is going to know best what you need. And so when you're doing your needs assessment, put everything down that you can think of. Secondly, some ideas may be professional development for teachers and staff that might be more longer term. That might be something that you would want to consider in some detail. I was also thinking about, the sanitation processes. Those are in that list of 12 uses for the schools portion of the fund, of the Education Stabilization Fund. So how do you do the sanitation, and how do you do the cleaning, and can that be provided through those equitable services? In other words, can the LEA start, paying for the sanitation folks to come through? So those are some ideas. Another area that I don't want us to forget about is the school choice area. For instance, in the governor's discretionary fund and in the governor's general fund, you could be asking for additional funding for, say, education savings accounts. So those are things that can be happening now. And with respect to the governor, that he has a little more discretion, particularly in a friendly state. So those are just some thoughts I've had. I have to say it is a little annoying that we've got to wait for the guidance. And because, of course, right now the LEAs are kind of making it up as they go along, and everything is up in the air. So that's frustrating. And we just kind of have to sit tight until Department of Ed decides they're going to give us some clarity.
There's several questions that kind of deal with sort of the strings attached with the PPP loans, and so I'll address those just briefly. We have, I think we're up to 3 written documents that kind of address those in different ways. Also, if you go back and listen to the last 2 weeks, we've hit on some of that as well, I think specifically last week. So I would recommend those as resources. But generally speaking, there are some strings attached. We think every school is going to have to make its own call. The strings only live as long as you have the loan outstanding, which the forgiveness portion, we don't know what that's going to look like yet, but that could be as little as nine weeks after you get the loan money. Or it could last as long as 2 years. The loans have a cap on them that the repayment is a 2-year period. So somewhere between 9 weeks and 2 years, that's how long the strings will attach. We think they're fairly, let me put it this way, we think schools can land on different sides, right? Faithful schools can say, yes, we can take the money, and faithful schools can say, no, we don't want the strings. I think you're going to have to make that call on a case-by-case basis. But there's nothing that says you're going to have to, open up the doors and let the floodgates in of all these things that we have worked to try to preserve, that we're going to have to let all those things go. We don't see that there are those type of things, but there are nuances. And so take a look at those previous guidance we've provided. We'll be glad, Tom, George, and myself, to follow up with a conversation with you on those as well. And we'll be glad to help you there.
Philip, could I go back to the previous question, just to make a clarification too? Sure. Regarding that forgiveness period, the way the loan works is that you're expected to use that money over an 8-week period, and that's the whatever amount that you're using is what is going to be looked at to be forgiven. So if you get, let's say you get $500,000, then if you only spend $400,000, then they're going to look at, that's all it's going to be, the maximum that could be forgiven is that $400,000. But they're going to look back at previous payroll to say, did you let people go? Did you have the same FTEs? And there's still more guidance to come exactly on how that's going to work. They haven't really laid out everything on all the steps to be able to get that forgiveness. But the key is you want to spend as much as possible on payroll during those 8 weeks, because that is the max that will be forgiven. Now, how they figure out what percentage of that amount will be forgiven will be a look back at previous payrolls, because you're going to have to show that you did not lay people off during the virus time or during that 8 weeks, or that you had reduced salary during that during this pandemic time.
I do just want to make a note really quick. We've had some individuals ask about previous slides of these updates, and I did want to point back again to that coronavirus legal page, which there's a link to it in the chat box. And those previous slides are listed there. So some of these questions that you may have that may have been answered previously, do refer back to those as well.
And Sarah, all those slides are in PDF, which the links makes the links alive. So the links like that George shared, you'll be able to click on right in the PDF to get to those.
Perfect.
So I wonder if it might be helpful just to mention what the legislative outlook is right now. And there's not much to really actually say, that it doesn't look particularly predictable, but last week there was an effort to replenish, to add additional funds to the SBA loans, and that unfortunately kind of fell apart. You probably read that in the news. So I expect that there'll be additional efforts along those lines. And there's also this idea that Congress will want to be doing a phase 4 which would be a whole new world of things to work on. So in the meantime, we're still, pressing the Department of Ed for the guidance on the equitable services part, worked with CAPE in order to actually give a draft of frequently asked questions that they could base their efforts on. So just be praying about that and how that goes and the kind of reception that we get. So.
Thank you, George. We have a question here. Philip, I think it may be best suited for you. It's talking about the problems identified using Zoom that have recently been highlighted in the media. And the question is asking, could parents sue the school if there is a Zoom bombing event during a school lesson? If the parents signed a waiver saying that they are aware of the risk and authorizing Zoom use by their child, would that cover the school liability?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a lot of variables there. So I'll kind of give you the sort of the takeaways of things you'd want to look at. So now that we know, Zoom bombing and the rest, so people hunting down and finding Zoom links that are unsecured and jumping in and putting all kinds of stuff up or saying all kinds of different things. Is there the potential that could come back on the school? It's possible. Now that we know it's a risk, it's something we need to address. And there's fairly easy ways to address that. Zoom has even provided those, right? A lot of this Zoom bombing is happening from sort of these open general postings that people can hunt down and find. So using the secured links or different ways to tie down the content. So there's, I think, tools available now to address it. But more to the question, so let's say it does happen. Parents are irate of whatever their child's exposed to or whatever happens. Does that come back on the school? They'd have to first show that the school's negligent. Essentially, they were asleep at the wheel, knew this was a problem. So you'd want to show where you're doing things, that, taking steps to make sure that Zoom bombing isn't happening. And how did the person get in? Was it through the fault of the school or something else? The other thing is going to be how, what's the harm that's done here? I think that might be, there's certainly circumstances where harm could be done, but I think that one's going to be a little harder to show, that this long-term prolonged harm has taken place. It's certainly possible. The other thing is going to be the waiver that was mentioned. I can't comment on the validity of the waiver. Waivers and releases are only as good as the paper they're written on, right? What language is used, and does it conform to your state law? And so it certainly could help, and certainly putting parents on notice is helpful. And waivers typically are upheld if they're crafted correctly and in a good way. And I will say, it's not a waiver, but we do have some language on our website, again, talking about some of the child protection questions and issues and things you should be looking at, as well as just a basic notice to families on expectations that you're free to use. And so again, that's posted on the website there. I know there's another related question that did come in as well, talking about Zoom and the like. I'll go ahead and address that while we're here as well. And that's, sharing images of students, taking a screenshot, those type of things. I think, again, we get too far. There's a lot of nuance there, but let's just say essentially, what's the purpose of the image that's being grabbed? If it's simply for the use within the classroom with those students and the rest, there's a lower risk. If you're going to be sharing it on social media or in advertising or something like that, that's a totally different use, right? That's an outside of the classroom use, and you probably want to get, you're going to treat it like you would if you used a student picture to put on the front of your program, right? You're going to want the parents sign off and permission to use that for those public commercial uses versus simply using it for the classroom. So again, some of those issues will be dealt with those documentation we've put on the website. And Tom, you may be able to address this one. There's a question about Wells Fargo. They're banking with Wells Fargo. They're in the queue. They're not really sure what's happening. And any tips or insights on there? There's also another related question that deals with our bank isn't going to be in the program. And now we're trying to find help as to what that might mean. How do we get a loan from another bank?
Well, that's a great question, Philip. We're seeing a lot of that where banks like Wells Fargo, even after that first Saturday, right after the 3rd, which would have been the 4th, they had already started sending out that because of some of the issues they had in the past, their amount of loans was limited, I think, to 10 billion. And they were focusing on giving it to small, independent, one mom and pop type businesses. So I would definitely, and I know there's other banks saying, well, you have to have banked with us, and I would just say, keep trying, keep going. I would go to every bank that you know of, ask parents. You may have a parent in your school that's connected to a bank. I know I've talked to several schools that had a parent connected and pushed them right to the front of the line for the loans. So you may want to check with your contacts of parents and donors and who might be connected to a bank. We've heard a lot about the small community banks have been the ones that have been able to get the loans the easiest. And I'll just mention, this is not an advertisement, but, I know that we've had a number of schools try to, that actually are members of ECCU. And of course, they were not able to do the loans either, but they do have a recommendation of a company that's doing them. So you might check with them if you are a member of ECCU. There's also a group called American Christian Credit Union, and I know they've been working with Christian associations and Christian organizations that outside of those who bank with them. So again, you might check. You can Google American Christian Credit Union, but again, I would try the smaller community banks, and then if they do give you the loan, I would suggest you keep that loan with them and use it as you see fit in a separate savings or checking account.
I know we've addressed this a couple of times, Tom, but there's been a couple of questions on still some confusion over what happens with that 8-week payroll period for the forgiveness, and when you let people go, can we bring them back on, or if we let them go, how long do we have to keep them? Is that sort of a forever thing? Can you just give a little more detail on how that works? Yeah,
Again, the idea of the 8 weeks was to be able to keep your payroll going, to be able to, in other words, it was giving you basically 2 months of help with your payroll, with the idea that you would bring people back on, you would employ your people that you've even let go and you've laid off, that you would employ them for that 2-month period. And again, that's the forgiveness. Now, whether you keep them after the 8 weeks or not will be a decision you have to make based on economics. We really can't tell you, do you keep them or not, but you'll have to look, has this 2 week of payroll that's been given to you allow you to keep going and get people at least through, teachers and others through their contract time, and then give you a break then during the summer before your enrollment starts. So again, you're going to have to determine that, but the whole purpose was so that you could rehire people, and that's where the loan forgiveness will be based on. And we'll have more details coming out as we see the schools getting loans, and as this 8 weeks starts falling on people, there'll be more guidance on steps to take to be able to get the loan forgiveness. So believe me, I'm sure there'll be a lot more coming out on that.
Thank you, Tom. We have a question here. It says, we're a ministry of our church and don't have our own 501c3 for the school. The church applied for the PPP loan, hopefully grant, and used our employees in their application, but we believe our tuition is going to cover all of our expenses for the school year. Can that money be used for the 2021 school year?
The answer to that is you have 8 weeks to use it if it's going to be forgiven. If you choose not to use it for your payroll and use it for next year, then it becomes a loan. And you have 2 years to pay off that loan at 1% interest. So I would say the church gets the loan, you use it for payroll, save what you have right now, for the future, to use in other places for next year. But you need to put that money right now towards payroll, and what you would have spent on payroll, save it for next year.
There's been a question about the Title IX waivers. You don't have to submit those at the time you file for the loan. The Title IX waiver, the religious exemption, is separate from the loan itself. All the language of the loan just simply says you, for the life of this loan, have to follow Title IX guidance. The Title IX exemption, the religious exemption, is separate. And again, you don't have to file that with the U.S. Department of Ed. You are free to do that, but it is the majority opinion that that is not required. And under this administration, they've come out with guidance that says that is not required either. Now, again, there are benefits and pitfalls of filing that now. Just to give you an example, it becomes a public record. In the past, we're aware of groups that have used those letters of exemption or notice to the Department of Exemption to actually go after those particularly colleges. So there are pros and cons to doing both, but you don't lose. Here's the bottom line: you don't lose the religious exemption of Title IX simply because you didn't file paperwork saying that you were claiming it when you applied for the loan. Those are two separate things.
So Philip, the point there would be, if somebody comes and claims Title IX against you down the road, you have the right, at that point, you already have the exemption, but you have the right then to file that paperwork to claim that, hey, we are exempt. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. And, again, there's pros and cons whether we want to file and put the department on notice or wait until an issue comes up and say we claim it. But you don't lose it. The key is you don't lose it because you didn't file something at the outset. I think those are, Sarah, unless you've seen some others, I think those are the majority of the questions we've had. I know there's a number of others, but I think really they deal with the repayment that Thomas talked about and how that works. And I'll give you a moment, Sarah, to look over, see if you see any others. But the thing I want to, I think, communicate again is there's a lot of other guidance that we have on the website. Feel free to go take a look at that. You've also got Tom, George, and myself available. If you've got those specific questions, call or email us. We'll be glad to walk you through the issues and drill down with you on those.
Amen. Great.
Yeah, thank you to the three of you just for all that you've put together for this. Just a reminder to our viewers today, this is being recorded, and so if you want to check back on it, it'll be on that legal legislative coronavirus homepage beginning tomorrow. So you can view this recording or share it with others who might have some questions there. And we encourage you to join us again next Monday, same time and same place. So thank you to the three of you, and thank you to all of the schools who have joined us today.
Thank you, Sarah.